You've already had the conversation. In the shower, in the car, at 2 a.m. staring at the ceiling with the kind of focus you can never seem to access when you actually need it. You've said exactly what you meant, with exactly the right words, in exactly the right tone. You've anticipated their response, 3 versions of it, and prepared your counter to each one. You've been articulate and composed, and said the thing you always fail to say when the moment actually arrives. The conversation was perfect. It also never happened. Pause, slightly wry. They don't know it occurred. They have no idea that while you were sitting across from them at dinner last Tuesday, or standing beside them in a supermarket aisle, or lying in bed while they slept, you were already 3 rounds into a conversation they hadn't agreed to have yet. Welcome to Thought Paradox. Today we're talking about something so universal it's almost funny, and so psychologically revealing it really isn't. The rehearsed conversation. The argument you've perfected alone. The speech you've given 100 times to an audience of 1. Why you do it, what it's actually about, and what it quietly costs you every time it stays inside your head. Let's name what we're talking about precisely, because this isn't just daydreaming. It isn't idle fantasy or ordinary planning. Rehearsal conversations are something more specific and more psychologically loaded. They are anticipatory simulations, detailed, emotionally inhabited mental rehearsals of interactions that haven't happened yet, often involving conflict, confrontation, or the expression of something that feels too risky to say without preparation. They feel productive. They feel like preparation, like you're doing the emotional labor in advance so the actual moment will go better. And occasionally, they are genuinely useful. Running through a difficult conversation before you have it can help you clarify what you actually want to say, anticipate misunderstandings, and arrive with more composure than you would have otherwise. That's not what this video is about. This video is about the other version, the one that runs without invitation, that replays the same exchange 17 times with minor variations, that rehearses conversations that have no scheduled appointment, conversations from 6 months ago that you're still perfecting, arguments that may never happen, confrontations with people who will never know they were confronted. That version is not preparation. That version is something else entirely, because they don't all look the same. Type 1. The confrontation you'll never actually have. You know the one, with the person who wronged you, the colleague who took credit for your work, the friend who said the thing that still sits wrong 6 months later, the family member whose behavior you've tolerated for years without naming. You've confronted them hundreds of times, in the car, in the shower, walking between 2 places where nothing is required of you, and your mind goes immediately to the unfinished business. The confrontation is magnificent, clear, devastatingly articulate. The kind of communication that leaves no ambiguity about exactly where you stand and why. And you will almost certainly never actually say it. Not because you're weak, but because the rehearsal is doing something the real confrontation can't. It gives you a version of resolution without the risk of a real response. Type 2. The argument pre-fight. You need to have a difficult conversation, but before you have it, you have every version of it. They get defensive, you're ready. They deflect, you've prepared for that. They say the thing they always say, you have the counter. By the time the real conversation arrives, you've already won 17 arguments, lost 3, and are emotionally exhausted from a conflict that hadn't started yet. And you bring that exhaustion into the room, which changes the conversation before a word is spoken. Type 3. The retrospective rewrite.
The conversation already happened, but not the way you wanted it to. You said something clumsy, or nothing at all when something was needed, or exactly the wrong thing at exactly the wrong moment. And now you're editing, in real time, replaying the scene with better dialogue, giving yourself the comeback you didn't have in the moment, rewriting the exchange until you emerge from it with your dignity intact. The French have a phrase for this: l'esprit de l'escalier, the spirit of the staircase, the perfect thing you think of only after you've left the room. For most people, that feeling passes. For some, it becomes a permanent renovation project. The conversation never quite reaches a version they can live with. Type 4. The imaginary defender. Someone criticized you, or dismissed you, or underestimated you in a way that still sits in the body like an undigested thing. And now, in the privacy of your own mind, you're making the case. Not to them, necessarily, to a jury, to an imagined audience who will finally understand, once you've laid it out correctly, that you were right, that the criticism was unfair, that the dismissal was their limitation, not your inadequacy. The speech is airtight. The imaginary jury finds in your favor, and somehow, despite winning, you don't feel better. Type 5. The conversation with someone who's gone. The most painful version. With someone who died before things were resolved, who left before the important thing was said, who is no longer available for the conversation that still needs to happen. You keep having it anyway. Not because you've forgotten they're gone, but because the need for the conversation, the need to be heard, to explain, to repair, to say the thing, doesn't disappear with the person. And the mind, finding nowhere else to put it, keeps rehearsing, hoping, somewhere below the level of logic, that this time something will resolve.
Now here's where most conversations about this stop at the surface. You overthink. You're anxious. You worry too much. That's not wrong, but it's not the whole story. Reason 1. The illusion of control. The rehearsal conversation is, at its core, an attempt to control an uncontrollable variable: other people. You cannot script someone else's response. You cannot guarantee how they'll receive what you say, whether they'll hear what you mean, whether the conversation will go the way it needs to go. That uncertainty is genuinely uncomfortable, especially for people who have experienced enough moments where conversations went badly, where being vulnerable cost them, where saying the real thing produced the wrong response. So the mind does what minds do with uncontrollable variables. It tries to control them. The rehearsal is a simulation that lets you run as many versions as you need until one feels safe enough to risk. The problem is that safety never quite arrives, because the real variable, the other person, can't be simulated accurately enough. And the mind knows this, so it runs another version and another. Reason 2. Unprocessed emotion. Looking for an exit. Many rehearsal conversations are not about preparing for a future interaction. They are about processing a current emotional state that has no other outlet. The anger that can't be expressed directly. The hurt that can't be named to the person who caused it. The grief that has no obvious place to go. The rehearsal conversation gives that emotion a vehicle, a scene in which it can be expressed, even if only internally, with the full force it deserves. This is not pathological. It is the mind finding a safety valve for pressure that has nowhere else to go.
The problem is that a safety valve doesn't resolve the pressure. It releases just enough to make the feeling bearable, which is why the conversation keeps recurring. It's not finishing. It's cycling. Reason 3. The need to be understood. Underneath almost every rehearsal conversation is a need so fundamental it barely needs naming. The need to be understood. Not agreed with necessarily, not validated in every particular, but genuinely, accurately understood by the person whose perception matters. And when that understanding doesn't come, when the real conversation either doesn't happen or doesn't go the way it needed to, the mind keeps trying. It believes on some level that if it finds the right words, the right framing, the right moment, the other person will finally get it. This is not irrational. It is deeply human. And it is also, often, a hope that the other person's limitations make impossible to fulfill. Some people cannot give you the understanding you're rehearsing toward, not because of anything wrong with your words, but because of something limited in their capacity to receive them. And the rehearsal, however perfectly it's crafted, cannot change that. Reason 4. Anxiety doing its job. For many people, rehearsal conversations are simply anxiety doing what anxiety is designed to do, preparing for threat. The anticipatory simulation isn't irrational. It's the nervous system's attempt to reduce the danger of a high-stakes social situation by running it in advance. The problem, as with all anxiety responses that have overextended themselves, is proportionality. The threat preparation system was built for genuine threats. It fires with equal intensity for the difficult conversation with your boss as for the one with your partner, as for the one with the friend from 3 months ago that has already resolved itself without you noticing. It does not distinguish between necessary preparation and unnecessary rumination. It just runs the simulation. Until you, consciously, with some effort, choose to close the program.
The costs are real, even though the conversations aren't. It exhausts you for interactions that don't happen. The emotional labor of a difficult conversation is significant. The cortisol, the cognitive load, the emotional preparation. Rehearsal conversations charge that cost without delivering the resolution. You pay the price of the hard conversation repeatedly without ever getting to the other side of it. It poisons the present. The person sitting across from you, the real, present, available person, gets a version of you that is partially elsewhere, partially in the conversation you're still rehearsing, partially with the person you haven't spoken to yet, partially back in the exchange you're still rewriting. The rehearsal pulls you out of the moment that's actually happening, and the moment that's actually happening is the only one that can give you anything real. It creates a gap between your internal world and your expressed life. The more you live the important things inside your head rather than in your actual relationships, the wider that gap becomes. And a wide gap between interior life and expressed life is one of the loneliest places a human being can inhabit. You have so much happening inside, and so little of it ever reaches the air. There are 2 directions this can go, and they're not mutually exclusive. Direction 1. Have the actual conversation. This sounds obvious. It is also the most avoided thing. Not the perfect version, not the rehearsed version with the devastating callback and the airtight conclusion. The imperfect, slightly stumbling, real version. Because the real conversation, however imperfectly it goes, does something the rehearsal never can. It ends. It produces an actual response, an actual dynamic, an actual outcome that can be lived with, processed, and moved on from. The rehearsal never ends because it never begins, and a conversation that never begins can never resolve.
Direction 2. Recognize when the conversation is with yourself. Some rehearsal conversations are not actually about the other person. They are about something you need to process, admit, or accept, and the other person is simply the character your mind has cast in the scene. The anger that keeps rehearsing? Sometimes it's really about grief. The confrontation that never happens? Sometimes it's about a boundary you haven't yet decided to hold. The retrospective rewrite? Sometimes it's about forgiving yourself for not having the words in the moment. When the rehearsal persists despite having no realistic outcome, when the person is unavailable, the moment has passed, the situation has resolved, that's often the signal. The conversation is with you, and it needs to happen there, in a journal, in a therapy room, in an honest internal monologue, rather than in the endless loop of the imagined scene.
You have given some of the most eloquent speeches never heard by anyone. You have won arguments that no one else knew were happening. You have said the perfect thing, with perfect timing, to a person who was never in the room. And part of that, the part that keeps running the simulation, is a mind that cares, that wants to get it right, that believes words matter enough to be worth crafting carefully before they're released into the world. That is not a flaw. But here is what that mind keeps missing. The imperfect, stumbling, real version of the conversation, the one where you forget the perfect line and say something slightly wrong and have to navigate the response you didn't script. That conversation is the one that changes things, not the rehearsed one, the real one. Because connection, real connection, the kind that actually moves something between two people, doesn't happen in perfection. It happens in the stumble, in the repair, in the moment someone sees you trying imperfectly to say something true. The conversation you've been rehearsing? It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to happen. And the person on the other side of it, the real one, not the one in your head, deserves the chance to actually respond. I'm Thought Paradox. If this one named something you've been doing alone for a long time, share it with someone who's been in the same conversation. See you in the next one.